Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Southern Delaware Alliance Racial Justice Monthly Town Hall, which is a very important one tonight. It is on critical race theory. Critical race theory has become the Armageddon of this century. The body of research and words that speak to truth has become as toxic as COVID-19. Perhaps more so, conservative think tanks, school board, and political candidates have used anti-critical race theory rhetoric to stimulate the fears of voters about dangers posed by CRT that will supposedly destroy America, our way of life, and the physical and mental well-being of all families, but especially their children. CRT has been defined as Black supremacist racism and false history. So you might wonder, so why are we presenting it tonight? And I hope I can get to the point soon. Our previous president, national president that is, true to his racist ideology, issued a memo to federal agencies warning against critical race theory, labeling it divisive, followed by an executive order barring any training that suggested that the US was fundamentally racist. Other like-minded conservative thinkers, such as Governor DeSantis of Florida, were equally passionate in their vitriolic rhetoric against critical race theory. As of July 21st, 10 states in the United States have issued bills on taking steps that would restrict the teaching of CRT, and 26 other states are in the process of doing something. Now that is a bigger response to a boogeyman than we've had to our epidemic. Why has this body of research become America's greatest nightmare? One would think that it is more destructive than a nuclear weapon. One would think that it is more contagious than the epidemic, which many Americans have chose to dismiss despite the fact the death of over 700,000 American citizens. At a recent town hall meeting at Crossroads Community Church in Georgetown, attracted 400 attendees who listened to scholars and parents and professionals talk about the destructive force of CRT and the anti-American, anti-constitutional aspects of this body of knowledge. And keep in mind, we're talking about a body of knowledge. We really are not talking about a weapon. One parent claimed that CRT was abusive and not based on love and friendship. Another claimed it was tearing children away from their parents. Critical race theory has become a major focus of school boards and state education administrations as more enlightened people are asking for a broadening of school curriculum at every level to include our full and honest history. While I'm inspired by our state's passage of HB 198, which mandates the incorporation of Black history into our school curriculum, I am somewhat worried about the full implementation of this legislation. We have seen throughout the decades of struggles, of hopes, and faith in our democratic process, even when battles are won, such as the passage of major civil and voting rights legislation, misinterpret that legal mechanisms, economic barriers, and the misinterpreted intentions are used to disassemble any progress. While those against CRT vehemently deny one of its basic tenets, that racism in America is alive, permanent, and still the major strategy of those who want to make America great again, let me assure you that their denial is the major falsehood in this country. Derek Bell, who is considered the creator of critical race theory, says racism is so deeply in the makeup of American society that it has been able to reassert itself after each successive wave of reform at eliminating it. And thus the dilemma: what would happen if we learned the truth about racism and its impact on the country, our laws, and people? What if children were taught the truth? What if children were taught to think critically about the full history of their country? Why are some of us afraid of the truth? I was taught the simple statement that the truth will set us free. I am not the expert in this body of knowledge, known as critical race theory. However, I want you all to know that the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, whose vision is to eliminate racism and all of its collateral damage, fully supports and will assist within our means, such as this town hall meeting, towards ridding our nation of its greatest deterrent to its greatness, namely racism. We are fortunate to have with us tonight a panel of experts who I am confident will be able to speak to our desire for truth rather than manipulate our fears. Therefore, I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Rebecca Ocado, Director of Racial and Social Justice Programs of the YWCA of Wilmington, Delaware. Thank you for agreeing to moderate tonight, and I'm looking forward to a really open and healthy discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte, for that wonderful introduction for our event tonight. And agree with her, we have a great set of panelists tonight. And before we get into our discussion, we're going to show a short video, and then we'll be right back with our panelists and some conversation.
Systemic racism is racism rooted in the laws, policies, and practices of a society. Systemic racism in the U.S. works through social institutions, such as the criminal justice system, to effectively discriminate against people of color while rewarding white Americans. In 2004, sociologist Joe Fegan developed a theory of systemic racism, describing how racial inequality was built into the very foundation of the U.S. through enslavement, then intergenerationally transmitted through stereotypes, unconscious discrimination, radicalized ideas, racial hierarchy, and distance between groups. Fegan claims that racism is not an illness of an otherwise healthy society, but an intrinsic feature of the society itself, giving white Americans power over people of color. Examples of systemic racism include slavery, genocide, residential segregation, redlining, the U.S.'s Jim Crow laws, higher conviction rates for people of color, increased surveillance, and lower access to medical care. These large, deep-seated problems require equally large solutions. The solutions, however, are quickly blocked by the defensiveness of the perpetrators. Many people feel an obligation to deny that they personally are racist and consider individual choices as personal taste rather than a symptom of systemic racism. Recognizing systemic racism can help people understand that racial inequalities are the results of the laws, policies, and practices we all live under. This knowledge can help white Americans address racism by supporting ideas, actions, and policies to promote equality, inclusion, and belonging, therefore helping dismantle racism and stop its effects on individual lives.
So first, I would like to really thank everyone for being with us here tonight. It's a really important topic, and whether you are fully grasping the entire concept of critical race theory, we hope you walk away with that tonight. And if you are a supporter of HB 189, we hope that you're with us tonight. I'm going to introduce now our speaker, who's going to give you a description of what critical race theory is, where it came from, and what its intention is. And this is Dr. Ezekiel Ete.
Thank you for that introduction. I want to welcome everybody. I'm going to share I'm trying to share my screen with everyone. So if you will bear with me a little bit, let me try to see where the screen is. History. My goodness. Okay, can you see my screen?
No, we still see your computer. So you need to stop sharing and then go back to, I think, what you want to share. You pulled it up.
We're just seeing your files, Dr. Eddy.
Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, now we have it.
Okay, good. I'm sorry about that. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about critical race theory and what it is. Let's go first with the, Ms. Davis mentioned Shannon King mentioned Derek Bell, who once served as an attorney for the NAACP, Legal Defense Fund. And he made the following observation as a young attorney. Number one, that civil rights victories in the courthouse of limited practical impact. Because racism is deeply rooted in America, people manage to circumvent court orders. For example, the Brown versus Board of Education, now you have the segregation academies. Churches set up their own schools. There is also a disconnect between what civil rights organization wants and what the Black community wants. Therefore, racial progress only occurs when whites agree that it is in their own interest. When it is in their own interest, that's when they agree. Now, Derek Bell also talks about the fact that diversity is different from equality. Diversity ideas give the impression that the playing field has been leveled. Diversity ideas do not address inequality and do not address past injustice. Therefore, the term critical theory is not new, and people behave as if it is new. It has been a part of social philosophy for a long time, the term critical theory. What critical theory does in philosophy and in social philosophy is actually to examine literature, society, culture, and what keeps people down. The idea is what keeps people down since the 19th century. The goal, therefore, is liberation. In the United States, in the 1982 conference at Harvard University, there was a group called the Critical Legal Studies. And what they did was that they looked at, during their gathering, they actually discovered that the law was not neutral. They talked about the fact that the laws in the United States are not neutral. Rather, what the law does is to seek to uphold the established class system. In 1989, a group of students also who were students of Derek Bell at Harvard University held a retreat at the University of Wisconsin, and the term critical race theory was born. The term was born, and they borrowed the idea of the name itself from the critical theory, which is found in philosophy, and also from the critical legal studies movement at Harvard. Then what is critical race theory about? When social scientists use the term critical, like I mentioned earlier, the idea is to look for a solution to a problem. It is not just to recycle the theories. In research, actually, and a lot of people in social research actually talked about the critical theory, and they borrowed that term from social philosophy, like I mentioned earlier on. The term itself is akin to dialectic materialism and class analysis. And therefore, like I mentioned earlier, the idea is to examine and look at and ask the question, what is keeping people down? It is more a critique of liberalism than anything else. And I mentioned earlier on also that it is a part of social philosophy that closely examines the power structures, the cultural assumptions, We find this in literature. We find this in religion. They find a lot of things people talked about these. And therefore, it is a criticism of American liberalism and calls us to re-examine how we think about human difference in the United States. The idea is to seek to reveal the myth, uncover the truth, and what keeps people down. In the United States, for example, you'll hear people will talk about issues of diversity, and we behave and think that diversity means equality, but that is not true. Critical race theory examines some of these assumptions and challenge us to think differently and so that we can uncover, like I mentioned earlier, the idea is what really is keeping people down. Let's look at the main ideas of critical race theory. Number one, there are actually certain ideas out there that critical race theory forces us to think critically about. Number one, that race is a human and social construction. Race has nothing to biology, has nothing to do with biology. The fact that we are white, Black, Asian, Latino, all of this has nothing to do with what happens to us. We are all human beings. It is not the fact that we are white, Black, or Asian. That's not what matters. But what laws are made and how do we interpret the fact that I have a Black skin and my neighbor has a white skin? What laws are made that actually that's associated with the differences in human beings? That's the first idea. Second is that racism is not just the action of a few bad apples out there. And in order for us to confront racism, which is actually woven into the fabric of the American society, we must be willing to be honest with ourselves, ask questions, examine assumption. And the idea is for us to seek solutions so that we can solve the problem of the society. We cannot just kind of, cover it up and just say, well, yeah, we have diversity and all is well now. We can all go home and sing Kumbaya. The third idea of critical race theory is that everybody must work together so that we can challenge existing hierarchies and thinking so that we can solve the problem of racism in the United States, since we now know that it is endemic within the society. The fourth one is that there is no one answer. No one person has the answer on how to solve the problem. Therefore, from the clergy to the home, all of us must work together so that we can dismantle the racist policies and structures in the United States so that we can truly, like Martin Luther King challenged us, to live out a true creed that we are truly publius unum, all from many, that we become one. All stories matter. And the more stories that we tell, the better we will be in dealing with our differences. We cannot just tell the stories of white men, white women, Black men, Black women. We have to tell every single story, and all stories are important, and it is important to listen to each other. Those are the main ideas of critical race theory. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ete. You want to go ahead and close down the PowerPoint. And I think we've already had some requests to get a copy of your PowerPoint, so I hope you're willing to share that with us. Also, will you be?
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you so much. And for everyone else, because I think we had this in both things, we are recording tonight, and since you've registered, you will get a link to the recording, and we'll also get out the PowerPoint to you. Next, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Ted Davis from the University of Delaware. And I did forget to say, I'm sorry, Dr. Ete is from Delaware State University. So he's going to talk about where does the current controversy in the system, what are the myths and misconceptions, and I'm going to let him take it from there. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Davis.
Sounds good. Thank you. Let me kind of actually take up where Dr. Eddie left off in terms of talking about the misconceptions about critical race theory. And I first start by talking about what would be the significance of CTR. There are two things I want to put up here. Excuse. The first thing is that there are two sides to every story. And the truth always lies somewhere between the two sides to every story. The next thing, in terms of trying to understand and to grasp the importance and the significance of critical race theory and what critical race theory tries to do, is there's a side say, until a lion tells the story, the human will always be the hero. So it goes back to this notion of there are two sides to every story, but it all depends upon who's telling the story. And if we only get one side of the story, that one side of the story, the person telling that one side of the story is always going to make themselves either the hero or the victim. So my task tonight is to talk about the myths and the misconceptions about critical race theory. The first myth I would like to say about critical race theory is that a lot of people get critical race theory mixed up with anti-racism. They're two separate movements. Critical race theory is just a framework. It's an academic framework for understanding issues of race, which are central to understanding. It argues that race is central to understanding American society. So for example, as a political science professor, when I do research, the framework that I use is a political framework, which basically understands things in the context of power. Power as it relates to the allocation of resources and the determination of values in society. So critical race theory is just a framework. It's just a way of thinking about, examining something. Anti-racism, on the other hand, is more of behavior modification. In other words, it's an exercise that's intended to bring awareness and to modify behavior, right? To get individuals to modify their discriminatory behavior and activities, actions towards other groups. So there's a difference between the two. There's a misconception. There's a misconception that says that critical race theory is a well-developed theory, and this isn't overstated. I mean, to say that critical race theory is well-developed is an overstatement. It's a theory. A theory is an explanation of a phenomenon. And I always tell my students, a theory is only good until someone comes along with a better theory, right? This isn't the gospel, but it's a theory in terms of how we understand the American society. One of the problems with critical race theory that has a lot of people up in the air is that the theory development versus the application. The application of CTR, a critical race theory, has gotten ahead of the theory development as a framework for studying matters of race and racism. As a result, think of it this way. It's like the builders of a house starting to build a house before the plans for the house are completed. Another misconception of critical race theory is that critical race theory is anti-white. Well, to the contrary, there's an aspect and a component of critical race theory that's called critical whiteness studies. This is a subfocus of, in other words, similar to what anti-racism does, but it says, okay, in terms of understanding race and racism and how society works, we also have to look at whites, not just racial minorities, Asians, in this case, Asian, Blacks, Native Americans. Latinos, Hispanics are not a racial group. That's an ethnic group. Ethnic groups are based on cultural differences. Racial groups are based on the perception of physical differences. And I won't go into that because I think Dr. Eddie did a good job of talking about that. Continuing on. Critical race, there's a myth that critical race theory is has to be an in-your-face type curriculum. That's not true. And there's no, it doesn't, to the contrary, it should be anything but an in-your-face curriculum. People should not be afraid and intimidated by critical race theory, because the truth of the matter is there's no such thing as a critical race curriculum. There's a curriculum that's built around the philosophy or the idea of critical race theory, which says that the way that you have to understand American society is that you have to look at issues of race and racism, right? And going back for a moment, part of the problem with critical race theory is that critical race theory is being politicized by both the left and the right. There are a lot of people out there with agendas that are pushing political agendas, and it's serving to the detriment of how critical race theory is used as a tool. A misconception is that the application of critical race theory is limited to Black history courses. To the contrary, when we talk about a critical race theory, a theory that's kind of founded on critical race, it could be courses that's involving things like financial literacy, health and wellness, courses introducing students to the contribution of racial minorities to the arts and the humanities and to American culture. It could be courses on family and consumer sciences. It could be courses on career development. All of these things, we could build courses with a critical race framework around. Finally, the problem with good Black history curriculum should consider how critical race theory works and the framework that has been used by other historians in the past. In other words, there are a lot of very, I would call classic works in terms of talking about Black history that does a great job of really fulfilling the goals of critical race theory. We're talking about thinking about people like W.D. Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, John Hope Franklin, Henry Gates, Mary Barry Francis, and our own Pauline Young. I mean, their works could be wonderful examples of how we could develop a history curriculum in which people don't feel that it's kind of in your face, that it's telling the story, that it's in a sense trying to help us find out where the truth is between the two sides of the story. So I'm going to stop there, and then I will come back with when we do the question and answer period.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Perfect time. I give you kudos. Next, I would like to introduce, I think everybody knows Senator Elizabeth Lachmann, and if you don't, you'll get to know her tonight a little bit. She's going to talk to you. She is the Senate sponsor of HB 198. I'm sorry, I said 189 earlier. I apologize. 198 and expectations from the sponsors, pushback we're getting in Delaware, and when we can expect to see an implementation. So, great.
Thanks, Becca. And yes, I've been very impressed by how timely everyone's been so far. I do not have a presentation, so you guys are just going to have to listen to my narrative about the provenance of the bill and kind of, how we got here, some of the different tenets of House Bill 198. Many of you may already be familiar with it if you were out there advocating for its passage, which we did, of course, achieve in the first half of the 151st General Assembly. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that Becca hinted at there in terms of what can we now expect to see with the impending implementation and some of the challenges that we faced along the way. Of course, first and foremost, I have to acknowledge House Bill 198. I am the Senate sponsor, but this bill really was and is Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker's baby. I was very honored to be chosen to be her wing woman on this particular effort, and because I really do believe in it. Essentially, for us, where we were coming from in bringing forth this policy, it was not rooted in an understanding of critical race theory. We are not, academics in that sense, and certainly not experts on what critical race theory is. And I would say when the conversations first began about this, it certainly was not the buzzword and the political football that it became in the 18 months or so from when this idea began to be seeded. So really what House Bill 198 is about, and where it really initially came from, was much more rooted in that COVID spring last year, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, Breonna Taylor's killing, when we were seeing our constituents taking to the streets, joining them in many cases to express their outrage and their sadness and their concerns around certainly specifically police brutality and those kinds of things. But I think really what we were finding is folks were very aware of the overall social context and the dynamic of systemic racism that allowed these types of incidents to continue to plague our communities and our society at large. And so we were hearing some very explicit calls from advocates and activists and constituents and just community members in general that we needed to see stronger recognition of structural racism in our policymaking and some real, significant and heartfelt efforts to counter that. And of course, that covers all types of things that we got to hear about in the video a little bit earlier. And as the Black Caucus, we had at the time 8 Black members of the General Assembly across the House and the Senate. Now we have 12. We, as quickly as we could muster in the couple of months we had left in the then 150th General Assembly, put together a Justice for All agenda, we called it, to talk about some items explicitly related to that movement and the call for justice around those incidents, both national and local. But also wanted to show that we were also interested in casting a wider net to looking at issues of structural racism in Delaware and how we could bring to light opportunities for us to do better as a state. Talking about doing, requiring Black history in curriculum in schools was not actually explicitly part of the Justice for All agenda. I would say it was something that came up as part of discussion pretty early on and ended up being more implicitly part of that agenda for us to be pursuing ways to recognize these systemic struggles that people were facing and just the roots of them throughout history and all of the kind of things, but I think certainly show resonance and parallels to that academic study of critical race theory. But I think for us, it was more about bringing these conversations into very important spaces, such as our K-12 environments, where so much crucial civic dialogue is formed, where really there's such crucibles of democracy and a wonderful opportunity for our young people to be part of a marketplace of ideas, and where we had heard time and time again from students, in particular current students, who were becoming extremely vocal about some of their experiences in our schools where they didn't feel seen. They certainly didn't feel reflected, oftentimes in the curricula that they're experiencing, and that this was just such an obvious expression of this structural racism that particularly our young people were telling us loud and clear, that they felt we could do better, and we could certainly create space to generate a better environment for better policymaking moving forward. So Representative Dorsey Walker worked very closely in particular with student advocates and activists as well. We had meetings with representatives from our school districts, from our Department of Education, from our universities, to talk about the possibility of working towards establishing a better reflection of these conversations about racial challenges in our school system. And so basically, what was generated is House Bill 198. And what the bill does is it says that beginning next school year, September of 2022, all local education agencies, so that would be all of our large school districts and our charter schools as well, need to incorporate Black history and elements, essentially Black studies, across the curriculum and across the grade span. One of the tensions we had in developing this was that we have pretty clear lanes of where the state has functions in regards to what is taught in education, and where we leave a lot of decision making up to local government, our school boards in particular. And so this definitely is reflective of that. We really can set standards and provide resources through our Department of Education, and ultimately the creation of curriculum is down to the school boards. And so that's what this bill does. It calls upon those local school boards and decision makers to figure out how they're going to better incorporate a reflection of the Black experience into what is being taught across the grade span. I'm just going to read specifically what the intent is straight out of the bill as I wrap up here. The study of this Black history and these Black studies is intended to do the following: examine the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and intolerance, prepare students to be responsible citizens in a pluralistic democracy, and reaffirm the commitment of free peoples to the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. So really what I think we were hoping this would accomplish would be to go beyond a rote teaching of, some very important parts of history, such as slavery, that we want, obviously, to continue to be part of curriculum, but we also want to hear about positive contributions and other types of dynamics throughout history, and that people continue to experience as part of the Black experience. I would say some of the other pushback that we received, of course, there were folks who were just sort of wrapped up in the critical race theory, political debate. So we certainly were hearing things from that. And there's nothing explicit in this bill that speaks to critical race theory. I think you could argue that it certainly has some alignment and is informed by that, but is not an explicit part of the legislation at all. And of course, we got a lot of questions about the explicit naming of things like racism and white supremacy in the bill itself, and asking that that be recognized and named as part of teaching in our schools. Again, I think for us, it's about having a fair marketplace of ideas in which everyone's experiences are recognized and validated and able to be discussed and experienced by all, for students to make their own decisions and conclusions based on their own ability to critically think. That's what great education is supposed to ultimately be about. We did get some pushback about why do a bill focus solely on Black history as opposed to incorporating all ethnicities and all cultures in one bill. And quite frankly, given the moment that we were in and an understanding of the position that Black Americans are frequently put in, where that experience is diluted or sort of demoted in the list of priorities, it was very important to us that there be a bill explicitly focused on centering that as part of the conversation in the curriculum. And so I'm sure we'll get to talk a little bit more about how this will begin to roll out. Really, that it now falls to the Department of Education in our state to implement what's laid out in the bill as in terms of what their role will be in order for them to set up our districts to be successful in preparing their educators and delivering a more robust curriculum that integrates the Black experience beginning next fall. So that's it for me for now, and looking forward to the panel.
Thank you so much, Senator Lachmann. And we're going to have all our panelists come on in a minute. We have two new panelists, which we're going to talk to for a couple minutes. Everyone come on. But we have Louis Cosme, who is the Supervisor of Student Service and Equity Initiatives at Cape Henlopen High School, or is it Cape Henlopen District? District or high school? Okay.
District.
Thank you. And then we also have Dr. Tequil Foster Lewis, who's also with the Cape Henlopen District, and she is the coordinator of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you both for being here tonight. If you guys wouldn't mind talking a little bit about what your job title, what it means, what you do. Ladies first.
Sure.
Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Tequil Foster Lewis, and it's okay. But I am the coordinator of diversity, equity, and inclusion for Cape Henlopen School District, as previously mentioned. And my role is really all-encompassing because what I like to say is that equity isn't one more thing, right? It's not this thing that exists over here. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are not, separate from what we do as educators. As educators, it is what we do. And it is an integral part of our work to ensure a learning environment that is conducive for each student that comes into our classrooms. And so my job touches all aspects that impact that experience. So that would include the recruitment, hire, and retention of diverse staff, because we know that all students benefit from having academic experiences that are facilitated and led by diverse thought and diverse experiences and people from differing backgrounds. That includes facilitating, developing, curating, and facilitating professional development for our staff, for our leadership, a host of things. Like, I really could go down the gamut. Pretty much anything that happens within the district, within with our staff, within our classrooms, has a component, or really it should all be done with an equity lens. And so my job is to ensure that this work comes from sitting over here to complete alignment and focus to what we do as a district.
Thank you so much. Louis.
Well, just kind of piggybacking on what she said, we work closely together. So part of my role is discipline and McKinney-Vento, homelessness and truancy. So bringing that equitable lens to those two aspects in education as well within that district, but also just being at the table. Being at the table when it's big time decision making at a district level, where we can discuss topics from K through 12 and even preschool. So having that lens and having that ability to influence decisions that affect the masses is great on our end. And if you look at our strategic plan, a big piece of our strategic plan is equity in itself. So we has a major play in that as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that from both of you. Definitely looking through things through a racial equity lens, I can understand that's definitely a process that we haven't done. So I'm going to ask a couple questions, and we are actually going to start with our newest panelists. So what are the challenges and benefits of teaching more Black history in our schools? And how do we decide what's appropriate at which different age levels? So take your pick, guys.
I can start with the benefits, and
Okay.
I'll simplify it. Just Black history is American history, is United States history. So the benefits of it is speaking truth and making sure that events are taught from different perspectives and different lenses. And it doesn't take away from other aspects of what has been taught. It's just highlighting and emphasizing some areas that have not been highlighted before. That would be the benefit.
Great.
And
Yes,
I
please.
I'm sorry, I would just add that, well, while we know the bill is coined as the Black History Bill, it's not just about Black history. It's about the contributions of a community of folks who have otherwise been left out. Their voices have been left out. Their contributions, their experiences, their stories have been excluded historically from the narrative. And they've played, this community, particularly the Black community, has played a significant part in the establishment, development, and progression of the United States of America. And so this bill empowers districts and challenges districts, educators to acknowledge that, to give space for that, to allow our students to experience that. And so that all students, not just Black students, but that all students develop a more global view of society, because it's not just Black and white, and it's definitely not just white. And so we want to ensure that our students I always begin with the end in mind. And if in the end of an academic experience, K through 12, we want our students to be well-rounded, productive, contributing citizens of this country, then it's important that they know the whole story, that they know that they're able to engage, appreciate, and acknowledge contributions from people who don't look like them, who don't come from their experiences, their backgrounds, that they know that there's layers to culture and layers to experiences, that even if someone does look the same, they don't necessarily share the same experiences. And so it will empower a generation of students to engage with one another differently, to progress the country further in a more united and collaborative way than what we have historically seen. So that is, in my mind, when we think about the whole system, K through 12 of education, well, really P20, right? When we think about that whole system, that I believe is our ultimate goal, right? That is the greatest benefit of this, taking this little step towards that ultimate goal. Some of the challenges to implementing any other initiative in education.
Mm-hmm.
I've done this for a long time, ma'am, and I don't see any reason to do anything different. That mentality is alive and well in many educators' minds. Just a lack of really acknowledging that this lack exists, that this is part of the problem, that the step forward, that this bill is part of the solution. Really acknowledging, embracing that is part of the challenge, and that's part of our work, is helping people, guiding people to that understanding.
Thank you so much for that. I got you. Hold on. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Foster Lewis. First, I thought you were directing that at me when you were like, ma'am. I was like, oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't question how long you've been doing it, but then I got you. I got you. And Dr. Davis, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. This is indeed I've got some problems here. this is a big world that we live in, but it truly has become a very small world. And it's no longer a situation wherein, you can, quote, just function as a white person and all is going to be well. Let me give you an example. So we're having some work done in the house, and we're inviting contractors in to give quotes. And we had one contractor to come in, and it was very obvious that he wasn't comfortable dealing with Blacks. So that means that and it was fairly obvious. So that means that that's possibly a $10,000 job that he lost because he wasn't comfortable dealing with Blacks. And so people have to understand that, first off, you have got to begin to understand. First, it's important. So the question is, why Black history versus other groups? First off, it's best to understand the environment in which you exist and the history of the people that you share that environment with. We have a very small Asian population. Now, that doesn't mean that population should be excluded from the discussion. Native American, we have an even larger Native American, and I think that history definitely need to be included. But as it was stated, that when you talk about history and understanding the significance of things, is that we have 30% plus of Delaware school system are Black students, and that number is probably going to get much larger. So it just makes sense that you're not necessarily doing Black history to the extent that you are isolating other, you're not including other people, but that's a population that shares this space.
Thank you so much for that. And Dr. Ete wants to weigh in. And then there's a question that's kind of been surrounding in the thing, and I want to throw it at you guys, but Dr. Ete, please respond.
Okay. What we're talking about tonight is something that Carnegie Foundation did look at in their research on American education. And the question that they asked was, what is knowledge? What is essential knowledge? If the purpose of education is to teach essential knowledge to the next generation, then the question then becomes, what is essential knowledge? Ironically, in this country, we have not actually agreed on what is essential knowledge. And because of the fact that there has been a paradigm shift, so to speak, about the way we look at each other, the way we look at especially race, issues of race in this country, the question becomes, whose story should be told? Whose story becomes part of essential knowledge? And who should tell that story? And that's what is going on here. And so should the story that we are telling in this country, should it only be stories about white men? I tell my students all the time in my lectures, and I say, that's what we do. When we talk about theories, and I will teach you theories from Sigmund Freud to Erik Erikson to all these folks, we are just telling stories about these are dead white men. Should those be the only stories we should tell? Are there alternative paradigms? Are there alternative ways of looking at the world? If our role as teachers and educators is just the interpretation to help students to think critically and interpret events that they see in their lives, what are the ways, what are the rules that should be presented that they should interpret the stories that they see from day to day? And that's what is going on. It kind of reminds me, Martin Luther King says that freedom must be demanded. It is not freely given. You have to demand. And as a result, some of the pushback that we are seeing, especially in education, is actually people just saying, no, we just like the status quo, want to keep things like they were. Trump used to say that people are hating America if you say tell other stories, present all the facts.
Yeah.
That's what is going on.
Yeah, thank you so much for that.
Can I just chime in one other thing? I think it's important also that Black students have exposure to their past and understand that our past is a glorious past. our past is nothing to be ashamed of. Because if they really knew the story of Black people, how resilient we were and how we managed slavery, but the things that we were able to accomplish once they came out of slavery. And then we went into Jim Crowism, to an era of Jim Crowism. And if you knew this history, man, you know, we would have nothing to be ashamed of, because there's nothing to be ashamed of as a Black person.
Absolutely. Thank you. Senator Lachmann?
Yeah, because I wasn't sure if we were moving on from this topic, but I think it's important, and I'm hearing it both in comments people are making in the chat and also from some of my panel colleagues. You know, I think I'm very proud of this bill. I think it's a really important next step for all the reasons that everyone is talking about, but we are not naive enough to think that we can pass this, have it signed by the governor, and it flips a switch, and all of a sudden the education and the knowledge that's going to be passed on is going to be exactly what we want it to be. I know I have a daughter just graduated from the K-12 system. She had wonderful experiences and exposure to primary sources about the place of racism and discrimination and positive things as well, in the Black experience in her schools. And I think one of the things that drove us here was knowing that that was not being consistently delivered across the board, where, you know, all students needed to be exposed to that. Now that's easier said than done. I think we certainly have concerns about making sure that we have a solid sense of what knowledge, what are the good you know, areas of knowledge that we want to be focusing on and making available to educators, and also that they are comfortable in delivering this information. Not every educator is going to be coming from a place, I'm sure, you know, our administrators here can speak to that more eloquently than I can, of comfort and true understanding, and certainly not firsthand experience with this content. And so, you know, again, it's not going to be a flipping of a switch. There's going to be training necessary. There's going to be, you know, potentially other steps needed to be taken to make sure that we are robustly supporting, you know, our district level administrators and educators to be able to actually deliver solid content that works for the students that they are teaching. Other states have taken some steps to form commissions and things to really be focused on that. We have not done that at this point. We're really going to be looking to work with our Department of Education and, of course, our school boards as being good shepherds of making sure that this is going to be happening on the ground effectively and as consistently as possible.
Thank you, Senator Lachmann. And I think you touched a little bit on what seemed to be floating around a little bit, and that being, what is the curriculum or content? And I'm just going to say that I don't see it limited. We keep calling it Black history, but I see bringing it into literature, right? Like, I mean, from kindergarten on up. And I'm also just going to respond real quick to Dr. Davis's point. It is absolutely essential that Black students learn about the amazing history that has happened here and the amazing participation and leadership that Black people have shown. I think it's almost just as essential that white people learn that information. Not quite as essential, but almost just as essential. So, Dr. Foster-Lewis. What? Dr. Foster-Lewis?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, like, that's me personally, that's one thing that's the narrative I'm trying to move away from, because that in itself empowers people to perpetuate the divisive narrative, right? Because learning about other cultures is not just benefiting to that culture, the culture that's being included. And it's a benefit to everyone to have those varied experiences and to have those varied experiences facilitated by varied people. That their exposure and that their worlds are opened up through these, you know, different ideas, perspectives, experiences, cultures that we, even as educators, bring into our spaces, right? So I definitely am I'm changing in my role, changing that language, like this isn't, and there's research to support it, quite honestly, that this isn't just for our Black students. This isn't just for our brown students. This, although affirming for them, this is for everybody. You know, this is to benefit the collective. And I did also want to touch on the concern around not being equipped with the resources, not being equipped with the strategies. I can say that, and Mr. Cosme can back me up on this, we have framed it as a journey in the Cape and Open School District, because that's what it is. I hope all the educators on this call understand that you are not going to be able to turn this on after night. You are not going to be the expert of all things culturally specific. And that's why I personally advocate for student choice and voice. Empower our students to bring their experiences and their backgrounds into the classroom, because they can offer something to this as well. They know some things that about history, even local history, that we keep using the word history, local contributions of people of color that we may not even know. They belong to some of those families. They belong, invite them to bring their experience to the classroom, give them a breadth of options to choose from when we think about literature, when we think about artists, when we think about music, when we think about even when we're looking at financial literacy. Bring those challenging conversations to the classroom in regards to how that looks different for different populations of people. And when we do that, then we create collaborative spaces, and we no longer have to hold ourselves and pigeonhole ourselves as educators as the experts in all things, because we're not, and we're not going to be. But if we can facilitate experiences that empower student voice, allows us to even bring our own experiences into the space, then we can get a step closer to being more culturally responsive and inclusive.
Just real quick, I just think it's important as a professor of political science for all students to know, to be introduced to any kind of history. I mean, our students are in trouble, especially when you come to not only history, but civics, right? That in terms of understanding our government, how it works and things of this nature, students just don't, the quality of students at the University of Delaware is doing a nosedive. And it's because they just really don't know a lot of history. And so I agree that it should, not only, and Black history is a large part of it, but just history in general would be very helpful.
Yeah, Dr. Ake, did you want to go?
Yeah, I wanted to say that if you actually provide a reason for people to learn, I mean, we live at a time when we no longer even agree on what knowledge is. Rather than talk about knowledge in our time, we talk about information. You give me the information, I decide if it is knowledge, if I want to use it. And if it is too much, people say too much information. So what happens is that if we give reasons, students will learn. I tell my students in my class, I'm a social worker, and I chair the Department of Social Work at Delaware State University. And so sometimes I will tell students, I say, one thing, if you are not, I had a provost at the university one time at a meeting, and he said something where he said, if you are not at the table, you will become part of the menu. If you don't sit at the table, you don't have a place, you don't seek for a place at the table, you become part of the menu. And so that's part of what happened. If you tell students, this is why you have to learn ABC, they pay attention and they learn. Because it actually comes from the assumption that we all seek self-interest. We know what we want, what is good for us. And so what you present that, and you present that information and give students the reason to learn about it, they would learn. It's like, for example, what happens at Ferguson. Somebody's shot dead by the police, and we know what happened here. And I told my students, I said that, when Emmett Till was killed in 1955, a lot of them didn't even know who Emmett Till, what I'm talking about. And so I said, when Emmett Till was killed in 1955, it led a group of people to use that. They became so angry, rather than burn cars down and burn houses down, they used that and fought, and it became the civil rights movement.
That's right.
That's what it is. And so you gave them a means of interpreting events. And as a result, people started, students started asking me, tell me a little bit about Emmett Till. And I had to bring a video to class to show about the story of Emmett Till. And that's a part of American history, Black history, that they didn't know. They had no idea what it was. Yes.
Well, and I was going to say there's a great question in the Q&A about sort of the, are there studies about the impact of CRT? And I'm going to leave that to our doctors to answer that question because I'm not familiar with that. But what I am a little bit familiar with, I know there's research out there that shows that students certainly respond very positively to diverse educators and topics concerning diverse experience. I think that probably is, I would guess that's probably even more true with secondary students who I think just sort of have that natural spirit of wanting to kind of rebel a bit. And I think they're fascinated by understanding these types of dynamics in the larger world and exploring them. So I think that's obviously a really appropriate space for that. But I find that, when I think of the things that I really valued learning, and I was definitely a social studies nerd kind of kid, I think there's so much, as Lewis said, this is about American history, not just Black studies and Black experience. And so many of these values and what it means to be American is kind of rooted, and we hear these great stories of rebellion and surmounting challenges in order to create and innovate and all this kind of stuff, which is wonderful. These are wonderful values that we get to embody. And this is about showing that that is not something that only belongs with a white face on it. There's other folks who are navigating all of these types of experiences as well. Sometimes, when we look at the truth, the rebellion and the seeking of justice may be against other Americans who do have white faces, and that is difficult for us to grapple with. But I think it's part of that beautiful exploration of what are our values as Americans, and what are these like sort of cool tensions that we get to navigate. And I think students eat that up. And I've experienced that as a student. I've seen my daughter do that. And I know there are studies that back it up, that students enjoy that sort of productive tension of learning. Not so sure about the CRT studies and whether those exist though. So maybe one of our professors would like to talk about that.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, go ahead, Mr. Hasme, go.
Just because, first of all, I became a fan. I got real quiet just listening to the other panelists talk. I love it. So I forgot I was on the panel myself. However, somebody put a comment in the Q&A about educators and needing to support them. And I think that we just strongly need to do that amongst one another. I feel like sometimes we can overlap our services or oftentimes can become critical of one another, as opposed to looking out for one another. So I just want to make sure that everybody's listening and that we as a people, as one group, with the same passion, the same goals, the same efforts, if we work together and sometimes sacrifice a little bit, even if it is a passion of yours, I lead by following. So if I got to give up a little bit so somebody can take 2 steps ahead of me, let's go. As long as we get that objective, and the goal is for the students and to empower others. So I just hope we can all get that today from one another tonight and keep that same energy moving forward. But I am a fan of everybody here though.
I know this is a great panel. I'm with you there. So we have, I know we've been answering some of the questions, so which is great. And I also know that Calvin's been looking at them, but we have about 12 minutes directly to answer questions from the participants. So, and everybody's been typing in the chat away. Dr. Davis, you want to say something real quick? You're on mute. You're on mute. You're on mute.
That people should not look at this as a zero-sum outcome. In that just because you're adding Black history, you're taking something away from some other history. As it was stated in terms of, this is American history, and American history isn't confined to the hunter, right? The lion has a part of this story as well, and even in terms of the Native American community. And one of the things that I think that before and again, I'm not a historian, I'm a political scientist, but Delaware, in terms of the civil rights movement, played a very prominent role. And so I think that story needs to be incorporated in history, in the Black history, in terms of understanding what Delaware itself, this little small state, in terms of things like Brown and the Parker decisions and the Wilmington garage, the integration of all of that, that there's a lot that can be just told about Delaware, but we need to also, and this goes to this question, we got to begin to record this history. So the problem of how we're going to train people, we've got to also kind of get students to understand that history and political science and sociology and all of those are the humanities and the arts. We need students to go to college and think about those and becoming teachers themselves and helping to record all of this history because it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just all comment in there, Mr. Nolan. I'm one of those, again, that believe that all of our institutions really do need to be reimagined because they weren't developed for society in mind as a whole. So I'm right there with you. Calvin, did you have pulled some good questions out?
Yes, in fact, we have a lot of questions. We probably won't get to all of them tonight, but we'll answer as many as possible.
Yeah, Senator Lachmann hit quite a few. She was like answering them. I loved it.
I love it. It's fun.
One question, are there existing textbooks that you think would be better in our schools that balance the contributions of different ethnic groups to our history?
The classic was always the John Hope Franklin From Slavery to Freedom. That now I'm quite sure there are others out there. Again, I'm not a historian, but there are some. Here was the point that I was trying to make when I was reading off these names, that we have a cadre of history talking about what happened from the 1970s back. I don't know what's out there in terms of moving forth, in terms of what type of information or history is being put out there. But yes, there are some classics out there that at least I would, in terms of coming up with a list of things to look at, because history is history. I mean, and all it is about now kind of updating how the story was told, right? And where the emphasis is going to be. And some of these people, Franklin, Carter G. Woodson, and W.B. Du Bois, all of these individuals were challenging, we're trying to tell the other story. Now is the time to begin to bring these individuals to the forefront. And so, yes, I think I know in terms of the classics, but I don't know what the contemporary classics are in Black studies.
I'm not sure there is one created yet, I'll be honest. I think, and I think Senator Lachmann said that a lot of it was going to be up to the school districts. And so that challenge is going to lie upon a lot of you. Dr. Foster Lewis might have a better answer than I do.
So, and I don't have a better answer, but what I would say is that I'm sure textbook companies are in the works of, as this is becoming or developing a momentum around the US, textbook companies will definitely become, more cognizant of what they're publishing. However, what I encourage anyone to do is supplement the material, because we're focused, let's talk about history. We teach events, right? And the textbook may teach that event through one lens, but we can do the research to find artifacts. And not even I'm always about shifting the effort to our students. Let's give them space to research and find other views and bring it to the conversation. Hold a Socratic seminar in your class to have your students really engage with the text and really look at other sources. And so now you're not only including a pluralistic view of the event, but you're incorporating other skills of discourse and allowing students to experience that content in a different way and to think critically about it, and about the experiences of all the participants of that particular event in time.
Yeah, the contributions to
just
science.
real
Whoops,
quick.
Go ahead. Nope, go
Real
right ahead.
quick, I think about contemporary Henry Louis Gates. Many of you have seen his stuff on WHYY. I mean, so even if you just order, you know, you pay 150 and they send you the videos and the books. So that's kind of a good contemporary. And today's students are visual learners.
Yeah.
So that's also going to be a large part of it.
Yeah, Dr. Ete?
I wanted to, exactly, I think Dr. Lewis has just said what I wanted to say, which is the fact that publishing has changed in our time. In our postmodern period, you may not have a textbook out there like it was in the 19th century. You can just put articles and stories and videos and things together. All it takes maybe is for the school board or for the, whoever is teaching that class to get together, put materials together from different sources, and you have a textbook.
Yeah,
I think you meant the 20th century, not the 19th.
I don't know. I went to school in the 1900s. I went to school in the 1900s. I don't know about you guys. I've been told that by my kids.
So you were not my classmate then in 19th century.
The 19th century is the 1800s. So no.
I know, but there were textbooks, there were books.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, got you.
Yeah, certainly those could be great primary sources to help us understand how poorly history was conveyed at the 19th century. It'd be pretty cool to read that.
The participants are having a great conversation about different texts that they read, whether they be books and whatnot. So maybe we can pull some out of there. I actually
at what century they read the books in.
No, they just are suggesting them. So, but some of them are talking, have a discussion.
But sort of along those same lines, though, we have another question. Are public school teachers required to teach pre-selected curricula, or is each teacher allowed to select the sources and textbooks they use to teach? Is there a standard, or do teachers have?
I can speak to that based on what the bill says. So really, it puts that decision making to the local level. So the Department of Education is responsible for assembling some recommended resources. They are not the only resources that can be used. But the intention is that they will take a lot of strides to provide a good basis of information that can be utilized if the districts need that support. But ultimately, it'll be up to the school district to adopt, if they want to adopt a set curriculum and specific texts and specific ways of delivering, they can do that. And so we're really going to be monitoring to see how this plays out, because there's going to be like a designated person with each local education agency, district or charter, who's going to be reporting on an annual basis, sort of how's it going. But I think because this is not intended to be simply focused on history, but it's meant to be integrating across the different disciplines and subjects, that it'll be a little harder to prescribe. It's more an encouragement to do things. I remember seeing in my daughter's elementary school where there were just throughout the year, not just Black History Month, pictures of people of different skin colors in the classroom, So I think it's less about a prescribed curriculum than it is about guidance from a school district as to how to accomplish that inclusiveness across the board.
I think that goes to lots of what Dr. Foster Lewis said earlier about empowering the students. Lewis.
So I'm going to be that designated person for our school district. So yes, sciences, the literacy, and the arts specifically, looking at how to incorporate Black history through those areas, because oftentimes it is social studies or English, and that's usually the outlet for new initiatives. However, one of the things that we're trying to focus on is we're teaching students skills, and content is used to teach skills. So the content does matter, but the content is the gas to drive the skills car. So using that content, we can pick that, and prescribing a canned curriculum, no, that's not going to be student choice and student voice at all. So we're trying to get away from that prescribed canned curriculum and move towards that different direction.
Yeah,
That's great. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, just as, sort of an action-oriented caveat for folks who are listening in, that, that's not to say a district couldn't make a decision to go canned. So that's why it's important to be talking, communicating with your school board and administrators, because they may not all be as wise as those which are with us today, and may need a push and encouragement to think differently.
Senator Lachmann, a question just went in, and I'm not 100% sure of the bill, but I know that one of your colleagues, Senator Pinckney, I think put through a bill. How are efforts to get a better ratio of teachers of color in the school system? I believe that there was a bill, whether it be about college debt, something along the lines of, am I making that up? It's okay if you don't remember.
You are not making that up. I know the bill that you're talking about. We had to sort of go back and revisit it to make sure that it would, be legally sound, because it is really difficult to do things that assign race-based criteria for the allocation of scholarship funds and those sorts of things. It's pretty likely to get shot down with a court challenge, so we have to find other ways to get at that. But there are a lot of things that we can do. I'm co-chair of a group called the Reading Consortium for Educational Equity. We're really focused on Wilmington and northern Newcastle County, but we're working on policies that we think could have impacts throughout the entire state, of course. And we're looking at different efforts to get more students of color in the educator pipeline, to make sure that folks who are not certified, licensed teachers get the pathways and the supports they need to become those, because we have folks who are paras and other types of things in our school system who are people of color but aren't full educators and use additional support. So there's a lot of little levers and mechanisms we can do. We're still working on that one bill, but certainly, again, I wish we could just flip a switch. I think it's going to be more of a journey to make more people feel welcome and supported, to be able to go all the way and be at the front of our classrooms.
So we have like a couple minutes left. I would love it if all of you could do like a 30 to 45 second kind of close up. And I know we could talk about this all night, so it's not easy to do. I'm going to start with Dr. Foster Lewis, because she's there. Am I screaming amazing?
I would just say, I think Senator Lachmann hit the nail on the head when she again used the word journey. Like, this is an evolving situation, and I do want to also keep some larger societal issues, in front of us. Not even societal, let's say industry issues. We are in the middle of a teacher shortage. So while we are still aggressively pursuing to diversify, we have to just as aggressively encourage people to come back and to stay in the field, of education, especially with with COVID and, all. It's really been hard nationally to attract educators, to attract people to the field of education. And so that in itself is a tall order. And patience is a virtue, join the journey with us, help strengthen us as we endure, progressing and forward. But most importantly, just be patient and be kind and empathetic to the journey. We understand that there's still more work and will always be more work to come.
Yeah, thank you. Lewis?
I'm just going to piggyback off to Quill and say, work with one another, empower one another. Some of us are at the table. We're trying to bring some more to the table. That's where the decisions are made. And we want to build that. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ete? You're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to say that this criticism of critical race theory is well-funded. It is not a kind of thing that people just say, but somebody actually, one of the funders and one of the organizers say that we're gonna make it so bad that every time the people hear about critical race theory, they're gonna just, they'll throw up. And so this is a well-funded kind of a thing. It is not something that I think we, especially us educators, should kind of take it, just easily and just say it's not gonna go away. Because this is actually a kind of opposition to asking for equality, asking for fairness, asking for the story to be told the way it should be told.
Yes.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you for being here. Dr. Davis?
Yeah, I just will repeat something that I said earlier, that this isn't a zero-sum situation. Don't look at critical race as somehow you're taking from one group to give to another group. I think it's going to be beneficial to all groups. But the thing that we do have to deal with, though, is that these people out there, and I think Dr. Eddie was kind of making this point in terms of who's politicizing this for whatever reason they're doing us more harm than they're doing good. This is a different day, and you not only got to deal with people of color in the U.S., but you got to deal with people of color globally.
Senator Lachmann, did you want to say something real quick?
Sure, I'll be super quick. I think, obviously our bill was not about critical race theory in any explicit sense. I think it certainly draws from some of the heart of it, but really what it's about is the fact that we have a very rich history, very rich culture as Americans, and in order to build on that into a future where we can all be successful together, our public schools are absolutely essential to that. And in order for them to be able to do what we need them to do in creating our brilliant citizens of the future is to be able to embrace all that rich culture and history and allow everyone inclusively to see themselves in that teaching. And so I really just hope that folks understand that for the underpinning value and can really embrace that as the journey that we're on together to become a stronger nation of educated, accomplished people, and the importance of being able to have the whole warts and all story as part of your path to understanding your part in that. So that's what we are going for, and really hope that folks can wrap their arms around that with us.
Thank you. And I'm about to hand this back to Ms. Charlotte. But before I do, I want to say thank you all the participants tonight for participating. It was great. All of the panelists, you guys were amazing. And to the others that helped organize this, thank you. And I also wanted to say that this is just going to be a series. I said it last night, but no one believed me, but you can tell there's a lot more to say.
Yes.
It's all you now, Charlotte.
I want to thank you, Rebecca, and all of the panelists. This has been a super, super town hall. And you're right, it's got to be a series, because I still have a lot of things to say. I want to make a few little comments to particular people. Dr. Forster, you talk about patience. You talk about a journey. We've been on that journey for 400 years. And so for some of us, patience is just another tactic of putting things off. As I said in my opening remarks, we work very long and hard to get things done, like pass legislation, and there's always a way to somehow undo it. So for me, I don't know if patience is a solution. I have a challenge for you and Mr. Lewis. I want you to go into your library, since I'm a resident of Lewis. I'm always most interested in the Cape Henlopen High School. And I want you to tell me, in that library, do you have Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, Brian Stevenson, James Baldwin? Because if you can't get it in the library, you're not going to get it in the textbooks. And I say this specifically because 3 years ago, I innocently asked your administration to put a copy of Brian Stevenson, a graduate of your high school, into the library. I was denied that request because they said the language in the book was not fitting for their young students. So I want you, and I think it's been resolved since then, but it just points to another era while you're being patient. Check out your library and find out if you want your students to be involved. For the past year, the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice has written modules and invited students to join us outside of your school to in a Socratic seminar kind of environment to discuss things that they were not learning in school. The students were high. They were wonderful. They loved it. And they said, this is how we want to learn in school. We want the subjects offered to us. We can't find the subjects. I mean, we came across students who had never heard the word Harlem Renaissance. So though you're asking for student input, you still, they can give you all the input in their limited minds. But if they don't have that information, then they can't comment on it and they can't learn. So I hope that when we talk about student input, we don't limit it to the world of students, which has been limited by our educational system. And check out those books for me. I really would like to know. I thank all of you. It was a wonderful conversation. And I look forward to us doing it again. So Don, wherever you are, make sure you schedule part 2 of this wonderful topic. And thank the audience that bared with us for a long time. And I hope you'll rejoin us in part 2. And Rebecca, I hope you will co-moderate, or you will moderate our next section. Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this.
Thank you so much.